Hello once again, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome to what will be the last week of lectures for this semester. We should be getting pretty well to the end all around. So where are we here? I believe you've done your last exercise, and really it's the project that is the big thing that has to be done from your point of view. From my point of view, I have to do the other half of web development. I've said this before. Like I don't spend a sort of equitable amount of time on client-side programming in this course, and it's because the server has to be there. The server is important. The server is where you're going to end up storing data, doing security checks, that kind of thing. There's just no way around it. At the same time, maybe just going from basics here. You can put logic in a web page. It's a script element. So you send some code of some kind over to the web browser and it gets run. So, in theory at least, a script element can contain whatever. In practice, you need browser support. You need the browser to actually support whatever you're going to send over. That's increasingly false, that the only choice is JavaScript. WebAssembly, is increasingly a thing that I can use. So in, I guess, not IE in any version, reasonably well in Edge though. So WebAssembly is maybe misnamed in that it's not really assembly. It's a bytecode, in the same way that Java bytecode or .NET CLR bytecode is designed to be very efficient and run quite quickly. WSAM or WebAssembly is designed to be something sort of very low level that can be sent to the browser and run very efficiently, with the idea here being you take some compiler, mscripten being the common one, that uses some modern compiler tools, and we'll take, say, C and C++, compile it to WebAssembly, then you can send that over to the browser can run it quickly. I've tried just the tiniest bit of WebAssembly, but I think realistically here we're still probably talking about JavaScript on the client side, or maybe something like TypeScript that compiles into JavaScript. I'm just going to put all those footnotes aside and say JavaScript. But whatever it is, and again, a lot of the time here you can fill in the blank. Like when I say JavaScript, maybe what I mean is anything running in the browser, and that's certainly true here. You don't really know what's going to happen, right? I mean, you have this idea that a web browser, is a desktop web browser like this one, runs JavaScript, is displayed on bitmap display with fonts and stuff. That's not the only way your web page might get consumed or your API might get consumed. Search engines are going to do whatever they do. You don't really know. Maybe somebody has JavaScript turned off, or there's some plugin that minimizes what JavaScript can do or something. All those are possible. Or maybe there's just an incompatibility, and this becomes an irritant of JavaScript programming, that you do end up looking over here and saying, well, can I use this feature or not? So I guess I have this link to the Mozilla docs. So I don't know, can I use JSON.parse? If I have a string of JSON text and I want to parse it into an object in JavaScript, can I? Yep. Yes. That looks like I can pretty across the board. IE 8. Yeah, sure. And whatever that, with whatever that footnote is. But that's an annoyance, right? That's an annoyance when you're programming, to have to sort of think about compatibility that way, like a function by function basis. I guess the other thing here, like I'm kind of implying here that, this is just kind of a not normal browser situation. This could be a malicious user, right? So this could be somebody who has JavaScript turned off and is doing something very specific to imitate the kind of thing that your JavaScript code would do if you were in some safe situation or whatever. So you really can't rely on anything being correct or running at all on the client side. A technical note on how this is going to go. Probably the thing you want to do is this, right? So refer to some external JavaScript file from within your HTML. It's possible to have inline code blocks there, or even like more inline code fragments. Don't do that. I think this is something that I understand. And let me tell you, a lot of you have been writing code for your project, and I haven't been sneaking a peek at your code, but I know you've been writing HTML templates that have a whole bunch of code kind of tucked in there in the template because it's easy. Because it's easier. You have the one file open in your editor. It's easy to just start putting a whole bunch of JavaScript code inside the HTML that way. And there's a couple of reasons not to do that. Some style, some substance. I do think it's bad style to mix that way, right? You have this one ugly, huge file that has all of these bits and pieces in it, and it can be hard to sort of figure out where does the logic start and where does the content begin. It can be hard to find and debug because like things are coming not from a file, but from something that came out the other end of a template, and you have to try to debug where it came from. You're also going to have these, hopefully, like if things are configured properly, content security policy problems, where what you hopefully have done is set a content security policy header in your site. For every page has this sort of, this is JavaScript can come from. This is like external JavaScript files on the current server, or from apis.google.com. That's what's being expressed there, not embedded code fragments. So if you do that, and hopefully you have done that, then you start getting these errors when you try. Again, there's a reason to turn it off, and it's you're mitigating cross-site scripting errors, right? So if you do something and it results in a cross-site scripting attack on your site, you're mitigating any result there, because you've said, I have loaded JavaScript from my domain that I'm under control of and from apis.google.com, who I kind of trust to deliver safe JavaScript code. I can't inject a script element because it won't run, because the content security policy says so. And I can't inject a script element that links to an external JavaScript file from some unsafe domain, because I've said that's not allowed either. So you should be doing that, but many people don't. And often they don't because they've done the lazy thing because some tutorial did that. And again, I understand why tutorials do that, because in a tutorial, you can just have one file that you kind of evolve as you go through the tutorial. It's easier to explain that way. It doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. But you end up following a tutorial, you get this ugly code, and then the perception is, of course, that this header breaks everything. This header breaks bad code. Don't write bad code. If you're tucking JavaScript inline, you can start to get these like arbitrarily weird either validation problems or just like syntax error kind of problems, I guess, depending how you think of it. So like, these things are like reserved characters in HTML. So if you start writing JavaScript code and you have this kind of thing, so okay, maybe in this case you're not too worried about it, right? If you have some kind of like this, sure, but of course, what happens when you start having this kind of thing? Like, this is a perfectly legal string in a programming language. What did I just do? Like, if I'm parsing HTML, this ends the script element, and then this is garbage. If I'm parsing JavaScript, this is part of the string, and this ends the string. This ends the JavaScript. Which one is true? And the answer is I don't know. The answer is it probably depends on the browser or something. I really want to avoid that kind of situation, and I can do it by just not having JavaScript embedded in my HTML period. Just having a completely separate file, a .js file, and that's JavaScript code. And then it's nice and safe, and there's no ambiguity about what that syntax is doing. It's a string. You also start to hit a caching problem where, again, especially if this code is big, right? Again, and I'm imagining here we're in a, in some kind of HTML, probably template, right? Probably this is part of my template that is like, wait, how does HTML work? Title. Where did my syntax highlighting go? That's so weird. Anyway, I don't know, right? Like I'm writing some kind of template here, and then it's, again, very easy because you started that way and you've been a little lazy about it to have this JavaScript grow and grow and grow, and you get a couple of hundred lines in here. And now we have this problem that every time I view a product on your website, I have to load that JavaScript code separately. And I can't, there's no hope to cache it because, again, I have this dynamically generated resource that, as far as any technology is concerned, I have no idea if these things are going to be the same every time I load the page or not. Just made my site worse. So probably the thing to do here is to have some master JavaScript file that has most of your logic in it or something. Maybe you have some very small amount of like configuration to do of like, okay, specifically to this page. So again, in this context back here, it might be something like, seriously, why can I not? Why do I have an editor if I'm not syntax highlighting? Anyway. So again, something like this, that's going to bug me. There we go. Where again, maybe it's something like that. I have some fact that I know that is specific to this page that is going to change every time I load. And I know this is an integer. Maybe I should be doing something like, that to make sure I don't end up with some kind of code injection if this field isn't what I expect or something like that. But something here, and then I have this. So on every product page, I have to call this function telling it which product ID because something about a callback URL or who knows what. So I have 2 lines of code that I have to generate dynamically, but most of my code is nice and static, can be cached and everything else, and that's great. I still have a content security policy problem because, again, this is inline code. So I somehow have to give this one-time key, which is shared and is part of my header. And I think I talked about this before, where in the content security policy header, I have, that would have been easier, wouldn't it? So that statement is, again, I can load this, so that makes this thing okay. How do you do this? I think you have to generate this thing dynamically. Oh, thank you. Thank you, tutorial. So for each user, for each page load, for each session, whatever it is, whatever the right granularity is, you generate this secret key and you say in your HTTP header, okay, now we're allowed to load JavaScript if it's from the current server as a script, JavaScript file, or if it comes with this right header, or if it came from apis.google.com. Then over here, you do that. So again, we have to do that dynamically. It has to be some kind of dynamically inserted value from the user session or whatever it is. Again, a little bit of mechanics, but it keeps us safe and it has this unpredictable value that an attacker can't fake their way into. Even that, though, is probably not quite the right thing to do. There's these data attributes. And so basically any element anywhere in the page can have data-anything as an attribute. So I can do something like that, not have to worry about setting the thing in a script that way, probably not worrying about this at all. And then in my JavaScript code saying, okay, look, when we're setting up a page, look at the body element, find the data-ID value, which is what that expresses, then we can continue on and do stuff. So maybe that's a little bit cleaner. It removes the need for that altogether. Maybe I can do something like that. And then over in my main.javascript, I would say, what would I say? Let's imagine I'm doing jQuery code. So I would say, so this would be for all, like if I do have an HTML class equals product, then on each one of the, so this would be, if I'm in the situation where I do want to initialize things this way that I'm kind of imagining, then set up then I maybe do something like that. So if I'm in the situation where this is relevant, or on each HTML where I find that thing to be having the right class, call the function with the right thing, and now I don't have to have any JavaScript logic in here. I just have this one fact, which is probably what I actually cared about anyway. Again, just something I haven't talked about. We heard about a little bit during the technology evaluations, but the document object model, there should be an L there. How have I not seen that typo? Anyway, I'll fix that. Basically it's an API to generate or to work with HTML and XML documents. So you can express things like, find a specific unordered list and then give me every list item within it, and I want to iterate through those. Or if there's a thing with ID equals foo, I want to grab it and start manipulating its contents. Those are the kind of thoughts here. And the thing is, this is standard, which is nice. And it's standard across languages. So even though I'm describing it as a JavaScript thing, almost exactly the code I'm about to show you works exactly as well in a bunch of other languages, because it turns out this is a useful kind of bunch of things to express. It's basically if you were in Compute 225 or whatever equivalent you took somewhere else maybe, if you were told okay, here's an exam question or an assignment question, there's something called an HTML document. It's got tags, and tags have attributes, and tags have contents. Contents can be either text or other tags. Then you would invent DOM. That's pretty much the story here. And in JavaScript, since we're sort of living inside an HTML page, or at least in client-side JavaScript, that seems pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious what document object model we're going to work with, it's going to be the document, the one we're in. And like I said, I think this is the design is not a surprise. So you get this document object for free in the web browser and the client side. So you can ask for, well, the document element. So that's the HTML element in HTML land. It's whatever that top level thing is in the document. So okay, you probably want one of those. And then that is an element object. Oh, okay. There's an element class. And then, okay, element classes have attributes, like I said, and they have contents, which are, I don't know, somewhere or other in here. And a content is, no. Okay, fine. They have the iterable thing that's apparently not called contents. Why do I? This is the problem with not writing a lot of front-end code. Anyway, you have to iterate through. Oh, you have to iterate through the thing. Anyway, so the contents, like I said, can either be other elements or text. So there's this superclass of those called a node, and a node can be a text node or an element node, which represents a tag. And off you go. So then I guess there's also the like searching part. So this is like in the document, find me all paragraph tags, or find me all the tags with class equals interesting. And then again, there's a collection, which is a node list instance. And on one of those, you can then .child nodes is the thing I was searching for there a second ago. Yeah, and do whatever you need to do here. I think quite often you'll run across tutorials that are like, oh, doing the thing in JavaScript is this hard, but doing the thing in jQuery is this hard. And sometimes that's true. I don't want to take away from jQuery on that, but a lot of that was written before the selectors API was in browsers. So this is, again, not super new by any stretch, but has come along after a lot of lazy HTML or JavaScript tutorials. So now you can do this. So this is effectively a CSS selector. So whatever I can write here, if I can express it as a CSS selector, this query selector all is give me back a collection of all of those things. And it's, well, okay, we don't want to read the spec document here really, do we? But of course, why would it have examples? It's a spec document. Point being, yes, you can use it. You know, IE8 and later, and the IE8 footnote there I checked earlier is basically IE8 supports this like selecting with CSS selectors as well as it supports CSS, which is imperfectly. It is what it is. Oh, and by the way, and like faster. So one thing I will say, again, when I compare and contrast here, if I was in jQuery, I would write that same thing this way, which is a lot easier to spell, right? It's a lot easier to spell $sign than it is document.querySelectorAll and remember what letters are uppercase and lowercase. In general, the thing built into the document object model should be faster because it's, you know, it's calling a thing in the browser, not emulating it in JavaScript, except jQuery, for most of the things you do in jQuery, will just call that function, so it ends up being about the same in the end. So this is both read and write. So you can find stuff in a page. You can also modify the page. So this is create a new paragraph element. So it's not visible yet. It's just sort of floating around. But I'll take that paragraph, I'll put some text in it, and then I'll put it at the end of the body. So again, not too bad. But again, the jQuery way to say it is shorter. I find myself like when I end up doing something like this, or you know, what a slightly more complex version or whatever, I always think, oh, I could just do this with DOM, right? Like I know how to do this, and then I get like 3 lines in, and then I think, well, I've got 5 more lines to write, and all of this would be 1 line of jQuery. So I end up loading the jQuery library in again, even though I don't really need it, and doing it the short way because I got other stuff to do. Whether or not that's the right answer, it does seem to be what I often end up doing. So again, the DOM is there. We heard about Shadow DOM a little bit from a couple of groups, React and Vue, I believe. Certainly React talks about the Shadow DOM all the time. So the idea there is, if I have a whole bunch of stuff on my page and I want to update it, option 1, strawman argument, completely rebuild everything using these kinds of function calls. Or the magic way that React will let you do, React will somehow keep track of, here's what the page looks like right now. I'll keep a copy of what the page should look like, you update it, and then when it comes time, I will kind of diff the two and just very carefully keep track of, okay, well, there's more stuff in here, so I have to replace these 2 things with these 3 things or whatever. And that, yes, that is faster than like completely rebuilding the entire page. I find it extremely hard to believe that it's faster than actually being a programmer who knows what they're doing. And you know that when I call this function, I'm manipulating just this one part of the page, and you do not 100 of these, but 2 of these to just kind of insert the element where it should be. So I have no proof of that. I haven't run any benchmarks on this, but here's my very strongly held opinion with no proof. Being stupid and letting an automated tool completely rebuild your page, having no context and no idea what it's doing, is going to be very slow. Having something with a Shadow DOM do it slightly more cleverly is going to be faster. Actually just doing the manipulation that you need because you understand how your page is changing will be faster still. That's my guess. There's a couple reasons you might want to update your page. One of them is like response to user action. One of them is you have new information. So again, we also heard the word AJAX a few times through the presentations, and I felt bad that I hadn't explained it yet, but there's a finite amount of semester before the presentations start. Basically what we're talking about here is JavaScript code can make an HTTP request with a really big restriction on to where. And the short answer is to the home server. So wherever the JavaScript code came from, it can make a query to that server. Sometimes other places if. But then again, this is up to you. At this point, we're just programming. So if you can write JavaScript code on the client side that can go back to the server, make a request, get the response, well, then whatever you can do with that. Most likely, update the page. So this is sort of fundamentally what AJAX refers to. Again, I'm not sure this needs this acronym anymore. Asynchronous JavaScript in XML. Okay, so JavaScript and I guess we know what those words mean. It's asynchronous in the sense that without this option, the only time you can get information from the server is when a page loads. So again, ignoring this ability in JavaScript, the only time you have the ability to sort of communicate with a server and get new information is synchronous with the page being loaded, or along with the page being loaded, really. This gives you a chance to go to the server, get information asynchronously. And XML, because, well, at the time we thought that XML was the way that we were going to always sort of encode that data to get from server to client. It turns out that's probably not the way we're going to encode the data. We're probably going to encode it with JSON, but AJAG is not a very catchy name. So again, the fundamental tool here is this XML HTTP request object that, again, it's this object that can be given a URL and go off and make the request. Occasionally XHR as an abbreviation for it, because XML HTTP request is a long thing to say. All of this is non-blocking, which is very much a JavaScript style. So you don't do what in most programming languages you do, which would be make the request, get the response, put it in a variable, and then process the response. What you do is say, make this request, and when it's done, here's a function. So when this request is done, or when you have information to give me, call this function. And then the sort of main JavaScript thread can get on with other stuff, dealing with button presses or whatever. And then when that event finally happens, when you actually get the result, call the function, then your code can pick back up and do its thing. Non-blocking IO is not magically faster, no matter what the JavaScript community says, but it is a perfectly good way to have fast code that doesn't sort of sit around and wait for slow network traffic and not get any work done while it's waiting. So the manual way to do this, and this is not even the complete manual way to do this, is create the XML HTTP request object. Say that when something happens, when something is loaded, here's the function I want to call. Please fetch this URL with, again, the contract there being when that load event happens, call this function, and then, okay, fire. And then this happens again. Whatever code kind of continues down here in the JavaScript file runs. When that load event happens on this request, then we've got some stuff, and we have, well, in particular, we have the response text. So presumably in this story, we know it's a JSON object that's coming back from the server. We parse that string into an object in the programming language. Then we can do stuff, whatever the stuff is. Once again, I know I can write that code, and then I usually, when the time comes, I just end up importing jQuery because, I don't know, I know this one better. And, you know, when it comes to error handling, I know where to put the error handler, and there's 100 options in here, and they're all nicely documented on this page. But again, this is, so again, $ means jQuery in this context. jQuery, call the Ajax function. With this URL, make a request with these parameters. So I expect JSON to come back, parse it for me. When this is successful, call this. I can have an error to handle the errors if they happen. Just much easier to deal with. So again, once I have this fact, right, I can do this kind of thing in my programming language, I can be a programmer. Maybe what I want to do is go to the server and say, well, is there any update? Do you have any new stuff to add here? If there is, append it to the list or table or whatever. Maybe what I want to do is start with a relatively blank page and go to the server and say, okay, well, what's the menu look like for this user? What's the current newsfeed for this user? What's the friend list for this user? And I'm doing this because I'm imagining Facebook, which does build itself this way with, okay, here's a page, here's some containers that are all empty at the initial page load, and then the framework puts all the pieces in place. Maybe it's just as something as like you start typing a name and some JavaScript code goes back to the server and says, oh, they've typed this. Do you have any names that start that way? And you can get that autocomplete interaction with the server. Maybe it's this person's been sitting on this form for 5 minutes. You know, they're entering their user complaint or they're updating their profile or whatever it is. Let's save it just to make sure that if their browser crashes, it doesn't disappear. Again, maybe there's some kind of like calculation that has to happen or data that has to be part of the calculation that's sitting on the server, and we have to go back and forth to do whatever work. All of these things sort of become obvious options, things we can do because we know how to program. One of them is a problem. This updating a page with new information. What did I just say? I think I just said, hey, do you have any new stuff? And then if you send it, well, that's great. Whenever the JavaScript code on the client goes to the server and says, hey, do you have anything new? But what if new stuff might happen anytime? So again, this is like, imagine something like a chat window or something like that, where I want to get new information kind of continuously or frequently and very close to real time. Like will only wait a second or two or whatever, but I want to get that new information from the server to the user kind of as quickly as possible. Or I guess even more like a game where there's some kind of real-time interaction between users. Well, this isn't really what HTTP is for, right? HTTP is designed as like the server makes a request and then the client makes the request and the server sends back a response. Okay, well, I guess I can make that work if I really have to by polling. And that's just, well, what kind of latency are we willing to accept? 5 seconds? Okay. Every 5 seconds, the client will go to the server and say, any new chat? Any new chat? Any new chat? And one, I think that obviously will work. And two, it's obviously a lot of requests, most of which are going to be no. No, there's no new chat. Nope, no new chat yet. Nope, no new chat. Oh, finally they said something. So that's the with no new sort of advance in technology, that's the option we have. It turns out there's another option here, long polling, which is basically instead of the HTTP request being what new chat is there, the request is when there's new chat, send it to me. And then everybody waits. So the server doesn't send a response yet. The server sits there and says, okay, well, I have this connection open. I know that this connection is supposed to receive new chats in this chat room or whatever when they arrive. So we'll just wait and sit there and hold that connection open. And when there's some new chat in that chat room, the server sends it back to the client and the client can display it right away. So having that connection open, waiting, lets you have that sort of immediate response when the time comes. It's just that this is not how the world was designed. This means every user is going to have that TCP connection open to the server and a process on the server sitting there waiting for it. Somebody's holding all those resources. That's not just, again, it's not bad inherently. It's just not the way most server software was designed. This is really where I think this is frankly one of the reasons Node.js initially became popular. It was designed for this. Node.js is happy to have a couple of hundred, couple of thousand connections open, just sitting waiting. The much more modern way to do this is to say, well, wait, I just said a few slides ago that HTTP is really not a protocol designed for this. Okay, so design a new protocol for this. WebSockets being the result. And the idea here, and if you've taken like 371 or whatever, is much more like that you make a connection from client to server, and instead of a like request response kind of connection, it's more of a we're connected now. We can both send information back and forth as we need to, just like a network socket from 371 or whatever. And I think there's some, I thought there was some example code. It must have been on. Yeah, let's open that too. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, if you've ever opened a socket, if those are words that mean anything to you, okay, open a socket to somewhere. Here it's to a URL, so not HTTP URL, but something obviously a little bit related in style. And then you can send, or you can say, when somebody sends something, here's my callback function. And that's pretty much the story of like WebSockets. That's really what we're doing. It's much more just a two-way protocol. Either side can send and receive as they need to. And if you're trying to have a chat or a game or whatever, you can use that tool for that job. This Stack Overflow question I kind of like because somebody went through a lot of work to answer this question very well. And have some very nice, so again, this is just straight up polling with Ajax, right? So this is time going across. So again, like the client says, okay, I want a page. Thank you. Okay, any update? No. Any update? No. Any update? No. Long polling is, again, like when there's an update, send it. Here's an update. Okay, now if there's any more, send them. Here's an update. Okay, now send any more. And we can get a very quick response that way. We don't have to wait, like implicitly in here in the diagram there say how long is a client willing to wait before they make another request, 5 seconds or whatever. Here it's sort of they get the response immediately at the expense of having this really, really long running connection open. Or which one of those? So the WebSockets is open the WebSocket connection, and then just everybody sends whatever data they need to. And all of those are perfectly reasonable options. And WebSockets are pretty accessible, i.e. channelator is not too bad. The thing is, frankly, I probably wouldn't bother. I would probably reach for something like Socket.io that abstracts that away and basically lets you write, again, it's like slightly more generic code that is, well, there's responses and there's messages and responses, and then it chooses whichever underlying technology works best between client and server. That's probably easier. It changes the way you program on the server side. I mean, most, again, unless you've written this style of code, all the server-side code you've written has been request comes in, response goes out, and that's it. And you want that sort of intervening time to be as short as possible. When you get a request, you do whatever you can do to generate this response quickly and send the response, and that's it. Now we have to have this thing that kind of hangs out and knows that, okay, this event over here has happened. That means I have to send data to this user over there. Okay. I feel like overall, I am going to be a little old-fashioned here as I say this, and I'm okay with that. I'm a little old-fashioned. It's fine. I think that your website shouldn't rely on sort of very specific clients to work. I think your site should work no matter whether it's on my phone or your phone or my browser or your browser, or if Google runs it or Google loads it, or if it gets fetched by wget, it should be somehow useful, or curl or whatever. Again, it's a different way than most people are used to building software. And some of this is just designed into the system. The part of the reason we have like HTML and CSS and JavaScript is content goes here, behavior goes there, and if Google, the search engine, cares about just content, it can load just that part of it and should be able to figure out what's going on. That again, it sort of gives away what this design is all about, and why we would want those three pieces. Which I think, if you're a beginning web developer, maybe that's not obvious. Like if that first time you did an HTML tutorial and CSS, maybe it's not clear why you want these things to all be separate technologies. The design of this is there where, like I think my web browser, like I don't know actually. I was going to say the web browser that I'm sitting at right now doesn't know about or doesn't care very much about this, but I'm not sure that's true. Oh, it's not. Okay, so within the last couple of versions, the default for an input is basically if you put who knows what there, the browser's job is to treat that like a text input. So it used to be, again, I don't think you have to go back too many versions here actually in Firefox to say, well, Firefox basically takes the perspective of, I don't know what that means. That's a new input type. I'm just going to treat it like text, and you'd get a page that looks like that. But that changed. Now that looks like this, and I can choose something. The other one, where do I look for her? Is it num or number? Pardon me, I'm gonna have to look this up. It's number. Okay, and again, I don't know. I know this changes the behavior on my phone if I view this page. Oh, okay, so it sort of does now. So it's not quite a text input if I say input type equals number. It has this up and down in Firefox. That's fine. What it does on my phone and on your phone is this brings up a separate keyboard. If I tap on an input that's type equals text, it brings up the full keyboard. Type equals number, it brings up a different keyboard. And those have been kind of added incrementally over the years in HTML. So it doesn't mean that that's what you're going to get from the user. Again, I have no idea if the user is going to type a number here. Like, I guess I can type letters in that number input box. I certainly can generate letters if I fiddle with the developer tools or I make some curl request. So I do still have to validate on the server side, but I just get a nicer user interface, and that's all of that design was compatibility on one side and sort of improvement on the other. But you're now taking charge, and you don't really know if I'm going to get a nice date input or not, or I'm on a phone or whatever. I'm maybe on an older browser, that's still legal. You should be hopefully making a site that works in sort of as broad a situation as possible. That should be the goal. So this is a part where I'm old-fashioned, where I like to think of, I like to have a page that works without JavaScript and then use JavaScript to make it better. This is old man yells at clouds web development, but, well, I'm the one at the front of the room or in front of the camera. So tough. Not to say this is a sort of expectation on your project, but maybe keep in mind, again, like what is your compatibility here? What broad category of users can you actually accept on your site? At the same time, yeah, like what about phones? What about touch devices? How are things going to work there? Is your site going to work? Are you, and by the way, one of the things I think I mentioned last week, like one of the things that matters in a mobile context is battery life. And one of the ways you can kill your user's battery is by doing a whole lot of messy JavaScript stuff. If you have like some big framework that does a whole bunch of, makes 20 requests back to the server and builds a page by doing a whole bunch of expensive computation and diffing the shadow DOM tree and whatever else, that means battery. And it matters. So again, we heard about some frameworks during the technology evaluation, and and good. I want to kind of give a little bit of an overarching summary there. Like presentations are good, but of course specific to each framework. And I talked about server-side frameworks over the last couple weeks. And as always, it's the same kind of thing here. On the client side, there's problems that we all have to solve. Let's not all solve them. And then if I have a library that I use so much that I use it on like every line of code, I'm going to call it a framework, basically. I'm not sure I can fully and completely and correctly categorize JavaScript frameworks, but I'm going to do my best. There's the things that I think of as like normal libraries, which is very often the like, well, we wish that this was built into the programming language. And this is true for many languages, right? There's just libraries that we all use because a lot of us are doing the same thing and that thing is not built into the programming language. That happens. So things like, yeah, simplifying DOM and AJAX and event handling, that seems to be the thing where jQuery has won. There's other things that are in this category. Everybody actually uses jQuery for reasonable values of everybody. There's also a bunch of others, again, just special purpose things that if you need it, you need it. MathJax, where you can take LaTeX or MathML descriptions of formulas and have them beautifully displayed in the browser, into that kind of thing. That's nice if you need it. Reveal.js is one that I'm partial to because like you're looking at it right now. It's what makes this work. Turns an HTML page into slides. and I like it because I like HTML, frankly. Every little while I find myself like saying PowerPoint, and what I mean is this thing that you're looking at here. Just because everybody uses PowerPoint to mean slides, but like I don't want to write PowerPoint. I want to write HTML because my brain thinks in HTML, so my slides are produced in HTML. So there's literally thousands, maybe I'm underselling it at thousands even, of various JavaScript libraries of all kinds. So I don't know, like, I mentioned D3 back there for like visualization sort of things. Again, if you need it, great. If you don't need it, well, then don't use this library. That's fine. The frameworks tend to be bigger. And again, framework tends to be like, okay, you're not going to write JavaScript code anymore. You're going to write all of your client side inside this big framework. And these are the things we heard about in the technology evaluation. I guess we did hear about jQuery and jQuery UI that are a little smaller. Well, I don't know, let's see. We can see how this compares. So whoever this is, they're top end choices. Angular and React and Ember, or Ariella, sure. Meteor, Vue. I don't see Vue on here. I would put that a little higher up, but sure. And again, like whatever site this is, javascripting.com. This is their, like, I don't know popular among who or with what, is it popular among searchers or downloaders or whatever, but yeah, the same kind of things seem to come up, not surprisingly. There's maybe a bigger variety of frameworks on the front end than the back end, just in terms of their functionality. And I think, like, for me, there's this series of steps that could be handled sort of on the client side, and some of them do some of these things, or all of them do some of these things. So there's everything between, like, on the server, wait, what are my sides here? Yeah, on the server, you have an API. So don't forget you need that. In a project, you need that. Like, you do need this thing that says, like, okay, when this request comes in, here's how I get the data, make a database query, serialize it as JSON, check the permissions first, I suppose, and then send the result back. So, okay, you've got the server, but then somebody is making a request for that, HTTP, maybe WebSockets, probably serializing it as JSON. In your programming language, there are objects. So you have, objects in JavaScript that you have lists and objects, or I guess arrays and objects of stuff. If I get some stuff in from the server and I have to build the object, or if I have the object and I want to persist it back to the server, can you help me with that? Or if I have the data structure and then I want the user to see the right stuff on the page, can you help me with that? And again, some of these in each of the frameworks. Okay, so I think, and hey, you know what? Feel free, like in the chat, wherever the chat is for you, if I get any of these wrong, feel free to speak up, because there are too many of these and it's hard to keep track of which one's which. So in this story, there's an API on the server and objects in the programming language in JavaScript. There's no user. I think in these there's no display to the user directly. There's sort of, I have the data and then I am, as a programmer, responsible for updating what the user sees. Backbone Meteor and the Ember data. So Ember, I think, does more. Ember data is the plugin that does the API to object path. I have some objects. I want to show the user what's going on. These are the like cool front-end frameworks that everybody talks about. And it's, yeah, I have a data structure, and every time I have this kind of object in the data structure, here's how you display it. So that declarative description of how to show things to the user is what, like, certainly React and, I should put Vue on here. It's the same as React. But then there's the other direction, which is if the user does something, they enter stuff into a form, or they drag something or whatever it is, how do I update my data structure? And again, as far as I know, Meteor and React don't deal with that. Angular and Ember do. They have that two-way data binding. Again, like this is one, it's bugged me, and it's bugged me when I've sort of fiddled around with React. And to be fair, I haven't done any large scale project or anything, but it's like, but I'm not done yet. Like, okay, I've done the React tutorial, I know, but I still have to do the other direction, and I find it irritating. And I still have to talk to the server, and React doesn't really address that on its own. There's plugins that do. And obviously that's oversimplified and incomplete and possibly wrong in a couple of cases. And certainly I didn't list all the frameworks, but hopefully your classmates told you something useful during the technology evaluation. So if I like this idea of writing JavaScript code on the client side, well, maybe I like the language. It's not a half bad programming language. It's generally nice. I wouldn't say it's a perfect programming language, but it's okay. Good work. It was designed in like 3 weeks or something. Good work for the time deadline. It's very fast. The modern environments to run JavaScript code are shockingly fast and very good at what they do. You already know it. Like if you're doing web development, you know JavaScript because it's the thing that runs in the browser. And there's lots of libraries and lots of Stack Overflow things. So that's good. All of that is good stuff for a programming language to have. So why should I switch to some other programming language when it comes time to write server stuff? There's a lot to be said for not. Maybe the nicest thing to be said is, and I wish more frameworks helped this way, and I think Meteor does. But if I have something like the user has to write a telephone number, and telephone numbers have this format. So I want two things to happen. I want there to be a nice text input, and I want it to be like read or have the little like phone numbers must be in this format if they get it wrong. So that has to be done client side because it's asynchronous, right? Like it has to be done as they type, must be client side. But also before I put that string in my database, I want to make sure it's correct on the server side because I can actually trust the server side. So I need to run that exact same logic in both places. That's annoying. But hey, if I have server-side JavaScript, then I just have to write some kind of like input validating library, and I can send it over to the client and I can import it on the server. And I know I have the exact same logic in both spots. That's cool. I would like that. And again, I think Meteor is maybe the one framework that helps you there. But at the same time, hey, wait, on the server, I'm in control. Like I write JavaScript in the client because I have to. If I could choose any other programming language, maybe I would. So I don't know what the right. If you like JavaScript enough to choose a JavaScript-based framework for the server side, possibly Express.js, sure, why not? If you don't like JavaScript that much, choose a different language and a different framework. That's fine too. I don't know. So that's what I'm going to say about client-side programming. And yeah, I know it's incomplete, but hey. But what I want to do now is talk about mobile web. Again, probably not the treatment it deserves, but the treatment we have time for. I don't think it's a surprise that like mobile web traffic is a thing. It does vary quite a lot globally. So in stat counter, and it's obviously going to depend on the site as well. Like I don't actually know who this website like surveys. Like some websites, whoever they are, get 52-ish% mobile. And if you go through whatever series of menus and you find the Canadian data, it's a little less. Yeah, there's reasons, obviously. Like our mobile data is expensive, but at the same time, Canadians by and large have enough money for a computer. Globally, more people have smartphones than computers. Mobile data plans are cheaper than they are in Canada, so I'm not surprised this is a higher number outside of Canada. And it's going to change a lot too. Like I suspect that, I don't know, who has a good mobile site? Like, I don't know, if you're on like Amazon or whatever, pretty usable on a mobile device. I bet a lot of people do. I would bet that, say, GoSFU does not have a very high fraction of mobile users because probably it's a real crap experience on a small screen. I haven't actually tried it. I just assume. I'm sure it's excellent. So I think it's clear, right? Like, you need to support these on a website. Again, I don't think I'm going to say anything contentious here. But the thing I am going to remind you of that a lot of people forget is there's more than just screen size to a mobile site. Yeah, like the screen that I'm looking at right now versus this screen, yeah, they're very different in size. I can see more information all at once on that screen than on this screen, sure. At the same time, as I sit here, I have a mouse. I can, well, one, with a mouse, I can trigger a mouse over event. With my finger, I can't. There's no concept of like hovering my finger over the screen. I either touch it or I don't. That's going to be different. Maybe there's some different like expectation from the user of what should be visible on a mobile or desktop site. I don't know how true that is in the modern world. I think like most people mostly expect all the functionality of a site to be visible in a mobile context. Again, because there's a lot of people who do almost all or even all of their browsing on a phone. So I probably want all of the site to be available in a mobile version. At the same time, maybe mobile version should have different things first. Like, I'm maybe more likely, again, like to do route planning or something in a mobile browser because I'm moving around, I'm mobile, than if I'm sitting at a desktop. Maybe. There's a couple ways to get there and make sure your site is compatible. I think this is very much falling out of fashion, the completely separate MDOT site. What is it? I don't even know where it is. Is it MDOT? Sure. None of these are the thing I want. Anyway, you know how there's that mobile Wikipedia thing? I increasingly find this irritating, and I think other people do too. Look, I just want to see your page. I don't want to make the decision about what device I'm on in order to be allowed to see your page. And you end up with two different sites. Like, from the point of view of the developer, this sucks. Right now I have to have like not one website that I have to maintain, but two. And maybe it's actually better for dynamic content for once. Now I have maybe just separate templates, right? Maybe I just have some kind of magic in my system that says, well, I have a different like base template. So users see this site, but if they're mobile, they see the site with the different template, but the same content rendered into the template. That's possible. If you're doing static sites, you're in trouble, right? You just end up having to maintain a whole separate thing, and nobody's going to do that. Even for that matter, like maintaining a separate controller or template or whatever, do you really want to? Probably not. Part of the reason is you need browser detection. So if you have the mobile and non-mobile version of your site, you have to somehow bounce users over to the right one, which is hard, and you have to decide what kind of browser they are from the probably user agent string. It's like I've asked in class, okay, is a 12-inch tablet a mobile device or not? And whenever I've done this, I've got like 50-50 on like, some people picture a 12-inch tablet that's like a Windows, what do you call them? The Microsoft one that has a keyboard and everything. So that's not really a mobile device. It doesn't work much like a phone. Or if you picture a like, actual, tablet that doesn't have a keyboard, maybe it's more like a phone than a computer, and it's really in between. So, I mean, that thing that I just picked up is touch interaction, but a large screen. I don't know. And just honestly, my advice is just don't. Browser detection sucks. You're going to have to probably not. I would just not. One thing that's especially irritating, and I had this happen, but this is like, oh, I'm going to go to visit the thing. Do you want our mobile site? Sure. and you go back to like the front page of the news site or whatever. And I had this, oh right, it wasn't mobile. It was on like bestbuy.com. Like I was looking for a whatever, and I found a link to bestbuy.com / the product I want. And I clicked it and it said, hey, you're in Canada. Do you want the Canadian site? Sure. And I went to bestbuy.ca, the top level domain, not the product I was just looking at. Look, I'm trying to buy something here. Like, this is a completely the wrong behavior for that site to have. I didn't buy a thing from Best Buy. I mean, I probably wasn't going to anyway, but I could have been about to buy that thing from Best Buy, and I didn't, because you took me away from the product I was trying to buy. And if I'd clicked on the Amazon link, I would have got the product. That's annoying. So again, I don't think this is the way to go, and I don't think most people would think of it in the modern world, but it's still there. There's probably still a use case for it. I talked about this earlier, a little bit at least, to how to do responsive CSS, and I think this is the way to go. Frankly, it's so much easier. So you start with good semantically meaningful HTML, where you have content that you can describe, and you can say that, okay, this kind of content with a meaningful class name will look this way. And then, so this is what we saw before. They just tell the browser you know what you're doing. Don't try to scale this from a desktop to a mobile site. I will take care of making a mobile site. Is fundamentally what you're saying. And then you can say this. And again, I think this is the example I had before. Okay, this thing is floating right, and then at some point I realize, oh, that doesn't make sense on a small screen. On a small screen, that's sort of portrait mode on a phone or smaller, don't float, instead be center aligned. And if you're printing, don't just disappear. That's pretty reasonable. And probably the thing you're going to do is have a lot more code up here. So you have your, again, like headings use this font, and this links are blue and underlined and that kind of stuff. And then a few of those things have to change on a mobile site, and you can deal with a relatively small number of these. If you do want a big difference there, like if you do have like this huge amount of content that you don't want to display on a mobile site, that's not going to work. But again, I think in the modern world, that's probably not the thing you're going to do. So this, yeah, like I'm not sure this site is it's like a little misleading. Like I feel like when you click on this, like it's almost promising you that if you do this, you are talking about only a Galaxy S3, not anything else. No, this is just like, this is exactly the settings of a Galaxy S3. If you have this this media selector, you're getting S3 or similar, or other things that have those kinds of properties. So it's a good reference to like, what does it mean to be phone sized, but not, don't think you're selecting a specific device with these bits of magic. That's the thing I actually wanted. So I think there's a bit of a question here. Like what I just described was really a desktop first site, which is you write a desktop thing and then you say, well, how does it not work on mobile? And it's what I usually do. And frankly, it's what I usually do because I'm developing on a desktop. It makes sense to me because the first place I see my page is in the web browser on this computer. On the other hand, you can go the other direction and say, well, instead of saying on small screens something, I will say default small screens on large screens something, and change the appearance specifically in small ways for a desktop site. That might be a little safer, where you sort of do think, or you, can I do this? Yeah. Maybe the first thing you should do is test on a browser that big. Keep this browser open over on the side of your screen, code over there, and approximately phone size display over here. And maybe that's the way you should start. Maybe it's the way I should start too. I don't usually. There are a few little tweaks in HTML that have been added. So again, like fundamentally the way this is going to progress is you have a web page, you send it to the user, the browser takes over and starts loading all the pieces from there. So like almost always, right? The way that you're going to put an image on the site is with an image tag, but it turns out there's this picture element where you can select, and especially if you're doing like a photo heavy site or like a diagram heavy site, maybe this makes sense where you can say here, if you have a screen that is at least 600 pixels wide, so like bigger than a phone or so, take the big image. If you're on a phone, take the small image. Or if you're on a small or like backwards compatible context, take the small image. That's, again, like for a photo site, I can imagine that being really useful. If it's a diagram, like I've kind of implied here in the URL, maybe just SVG would have been better anyway, smaller file and scale. But if this was a photograph, I can see really this starting to make sense on like a photo gallery. I think this is why this is probably the preferred thing. It's I don't actually want my page to be different. I want it to be just like minimally changed so it can be used in the smaller screen and with a slightly different context. Probably I do want to make pretty minimal differences, so I probably want a mobile style sheet. The other way that you can get your content on a mobile device is an app. And okay, I'm going to admit, I'm a web guy. I'm not an app writer, and I don't want to be. So I'll just put my bias out there that it's not the way I want to go. But okay, this is I'm at company. Company has stuff. They're going to sell stuff, or they're going to get their information out there, or solicit users, whatever it is. Right? You're going to interact with your user base somehow. You can either have a really good mobile website, or you can have an app. And it seems like the answer that everybody comes to is we're going to have an app. Now, that means you can be found in the App Store. That's good. Having an app means that you do have access to more phone features, or at least more phone features more easily, where like an app can access the camera if it's given permission when it's installed. A web page needs sort of, when it loads, it needs permission to access the camera. That's a little awkward. It's just kind of an awkward user interaction. It's maybe easier to just grant the app access to that and then it sticks. You're running native code, which, if you're just going to display some information about the company, doesn't matter. But if you have a game, it probably does. And it means you work offline. Okay, so again, like I think all of that's good. It's not like I'm totally opposed to apps. I have some. But you then have these problems, and especially like I need at least 2 versions of my app. Admittedly, maybe you're not going to write the Windows Phone or BlackBerry version of your app. I'll admit that. You're sad to see BlackBerry go. They're a good Canadian company, but I don't think BlackBerry OS is something you're worrying about, probably. It does mean that users have to install the thing. And I've certainly, I have a friend who is, for some reason, he just refuses to install the Zoom program on his computer and always uses the web interface. It's he just doesn't want to do that for whatever reason. Or again, sometimes it's just don't find it, or don't want to have that commitment to your product they've never heard of, or whatever it is. Maybe they don't want to install the app. I like links. And I know there's the intents or whatever it is in Android, you can kind of link into an app, but it's a pain in the ass. I like URLs, and they're a good way. There's something you can share. There's something you can pass around. Other sites can connect to that. It's very much trickier in a phone. You have to have some kind of sharing interaction with the user where you can share a link that somehow takes you back and bounces you back into the app. And there's some mechanics there that I don't want to worry about. I think a lot of sites, if you look at your phone, I'm going to do it right now. Oh, look, pictures of my nieces. Anyway, if I look at the apps on my phone, Amazon, Airbnb, a weather app. Why do I have apps for these? All of these can be perfectly good web pages. Facebook can be a web page. Yeah, I feel like I have a lot of apps because the way that the company kind of implies that I should interact with them is with their app, and that's fine. I'm not opposed to it in a case where I'm actually going to use it a lot. Maybe a lot of those things, or maybe there are things I would use if they just pointed me at their website a little more easily. Coming back towards this course, I think there's a lot of sort of in the developer world, one thing you really do want to avoid is having to write 2 apps. That's one more than necessary, it feels like. So things like, well, first, jQuery Mobile and Sencha Touch are things that you are writing a web page. So we're still writing web stuff in this part of the story, but you make it look enough like an app. So you have something like in jQuery Mobile, where's the, I don't know, what looks very distinct on a phone? That's a range slider. I don't know if that looks like a phone or not. But the idea here is that it takes, kind of normal HTML kind of things and gives you enough like JavaScript and CSS that they look like phone things. Fixed toolbar, sure, that's something phones have. Wow, that's not what I was picturing at all. Maybe it's just out of context here. If you put that thing at the top of my phone screen and it was taking up the right amount of space and had the right font, I guess that would look like a sort of top of a toolbar kind of thing. And yeah, the cancel or options or whatever at the bottom of the screen, I guess. Now that I see more, slightly more interesting examples, maybe it makes more sense. But again, that's the idea. There's no app in this part of the story, but maybe it makes your mobile website look enough like an app that, and again, maybe those reskin themselves depending on whether you're in iOS or Android to make it look a little more natural. Maybe that's good enough. Or maybe what you want to do is make a web thing because you've got to make a web thing anyway. You've got to have a website. You've got to do all that. Maybe, and you have to have a mobile website. Maybe what you want to do is sort of take that thing, wrap it up and call it an app. So this is what like Cordova or PhoneGap, or depending on if you're paying or not, or React Native will do. Oh God, I was looking at one of these earlier and now I forget which one. So yeah, this looks familiar. So the idea here is like I have a text input thing. So the developer writes just JavaScript code, or is that JavaScript? Yeah. Well, it's a JSX code. And then on your mobile device, and I feel like the startup time is not inspiring here, but you have, well, I don't know why there's a pizza thing there, but and like, I don't know, they displayed this really annoyingly. Anyway, you get the idea. Like you have this thing where you write basically a web thing, React Native or Cordova turns that into an app. So it sort of wraps that up so that inside you get to basically work with a web view, something that to you as a developer works like a web page, and to the outside world looks like an app, and is then cross-platform. So it kind of works in different contexts. It effectively is like built for Android or iOS or Windows App Store or whatever. That's nice, and that's great because I don't want to write separate apps for each one of those. Where's the... that's what I was looking for. So the other thing here is, because now we're imagining writing an app, we have permissions for these things. We don't have to deal with the browser API for these, or at least the browser API for things like cameras is sort of presented in such a way that it works as an app, which is maybe a lot easier to deal with as a developer. And you just get these calls where you can then take a photo or whatever. that's really nice. Maybe this isn't the solution for like high performance if you have a game, but again, if you're putting words on the screen and just kind of letting the user browse your store or whatever, this seems like a really good way to do it. You still have to be a little careful, which is why I talked about those things like jQuery UI. And I think both of those, like Cordova and React Native, both provide a little bit of like, here are the things you can do to make it look like an app, not just be an app. And again, speed is probably the other drawback there. So I think, you know, if I was in a situation where somebody said there must be an app, this is probably how I would create an app until proven otherwise. All right. So that ends what I want to talk about there. Like I said at the start, a project is really the big thing that you are worried about at this point. Finish your project, do a good job there. Otherwise, I guess I am mostly done. That was fun. Maybe not the usual room that I give lectures in, but I feel like that was okay. Yeah, hope you enjoyed the course. Hopefully your project's going well. Go finish it off, have fun. I will see you wherever I see you. Bye.